Untitled Project Management. In this module, we will explore the tools and techniques you can use to communicate effectively with your project stakeholders. Here's what you will learn in this module. Since 70 to 80% of a project manager's job is to communicate with all the stakeholders on the project, PMI, the Project Management Institute, has allocated two knowledge areas to successful interpersonal relationships: project communication management and project stakeholder management. This shows how successful communication is the centerpiece of a successful project. To achieve this, we will look at the basic parts of the communication process and learn how to plan regular, transparent, honest, and accessible communication with project stakeholders. This will include reviewing some time-proven practices at improving our own communication skills and identifying tools that can help get messages back and forth quickly and with ease. Lastly, we will look at the project status report and the information it conveys to the stakeholders. You can't really separate project stakeholder management from project communication management very well. So let's begin by taking the two PMBOK knowledge areas and see how they interact. As you can see on this slide, the project communication and stakeholder management process areas go together. Before you can plan stakeholder management, though, you first need to understand who your stakeholders actually are. Then, as you figure out which of your stakeholders need what kind of information about the project, that's when you plan your stakeholder management and at the same time your communications management as well. You will need those plans as early as possible in the project because remember, 80% or so of a project manager's job is to communicate. So once you've set up your communication rhythms and you have your email lists or Slack or WhatsApp groups and your SharePoint dashboards in place, it's important to ensure that you send out the data you promised, when you promised them, and to whom you promised them, making sure that every stakeholder who needs to receive communication from you also gets this communication and has adequate time to comment, approve, or ask questions and knows who their contact people are. This is where monitoring communications and stakeholder engagement truly intersect. So let's step right into project communications management. The basic communication cycle goes like this. You, the sender, have an idea. You want to communicate the idea. So you figure out how to package your idea into words, what tone of voice to use, how to move your hands or not as you speak, whether to look your communication partner in the eye, all that and more. All of that is called encoding. Once your idea is encoded, you have a message. Now you have to get that message to your stakeholder in some way. For that, you use a communication channel like face-to-face or a telephone call, a WhatsApp message, or a good old-fashioned email. That message makes it to your stakeholder, and the stakeholder now has to decode it. Three major aspects are important here. First, that your stakeholder knows how to decode it. Let's say your message was in Spanish. For your stakeholder to decode it, they would have to speak Spanish as well, or know how to use a tool like Google Translate to help them see what you are actually saying. Second, that your stakeholder gets the information that they were looking for. And third, that they can understand the tone of your voice, even in written communication, whether you're friendly, angry, funny, sarcastic, that kind of thing. Especially the latter requires a lot of the stakeholder's cultural knowledge, because at this point it is very easy to be misunderstood. So now the stakeholder has a question, and they encode their own message to you, decide to pick up the phone and give you a call. As soon as you answer your phone, you realize they're speaking Spanish with you, and you leverage however much Spanish you have learned in high school or college or the school of life so you can listen to them. Then you formulate your response, and the entire communication and feedback cycle starts again. Why is this important? Because as the project manager, it's your job to ensure that everyone understands exactly what you are communicating. This includes knowing how people like to communicate and what their favorite tools are, so that you can easily plan how to communicate the most important project information to them. You're seeing here the 5 most important aspects that your communication plan needs to address: the who, what, how, when, and where of your project communication. Why do we need to plan all of this? Because nobody likes surprises, especially bad ones. That's why it is so important to communicate status, risks, issues, and any information that stakeholders need to adjust expectations, make decisions, and take action very quickly. Now, when you communicate a risk or an issue, always make sure you have an idea of how to minimize the impact on your project schedule and budget, and know where your project stands in comparison to the approved budget and schedule that is the baseline. As they say, different strokes for different folks. In other words, different stakeholders require different information based on their roles in order to, number 1, be successful in their work, and number 2, trust you to manage their project. To communicate effectively with your customers, you will want to really do your research on their needs, culture, and possibly even business pains, and document everything before the project execution starts. That can always help should any disagreements arise down the road. Now, when communicating with your project team members, you will want to settle into a regular rhythm quickly. People need to know when to expect an email or a Slack message from you about the internal state of the project, about scope changes or upcoming schedule items. If something isn't quite right with the group's teamwork, though, it is much better to schedule informal one-on-one meetings with each member so you can get an insight on what's causing the conflict, and you can gather ideas on how that conflict might be fixed. At any rate, let the team know that you can be approached at any time. And at the same time, it's important to constantly build and maintain a great relationship with the resource managers. Because if you are in good standing with a resource manager, your requests for people or equipment will never be roadblocked. The same goes for executives if they have questions. Now, preferably, you want to be economical with their time. Typically, an executive has many projects to attend to, so condensing the information for your project to a simplified milestone-only schedule and continuously updated project risks will be key to help them make their decisions for the future of the organization and for the benefit of your project. To be sure, PMI lists 3 different communication types. The first one is interactive or two-way communication, in which you are having a direct dialogue with your stakeholders. The goal of interactive communication is to come to a common understanding of important product features and project parameters, like scope or requirements clarifications, schedule clarifications, and so on. You will also use interactive communication to announce bad news to the stakeholders, because this will help resolve questions and comments immediately and prevent rumors from forming. Then there is push communication, in which you actively deliver information to your stakeholders, as with emails, voicemail messages, texts, and the like. And there's pull communication, in which a stakeholder has to act to retrieve the communication. That can be web portals and blogs or internal SharePoint sites and so on. The most important thing here is to ensure you work with the communication method of preference for your stakeholders or the organization. So let's assume you have a weekly status to communicate. What's the best format? Meetings, email, a portal? If you decide to have meetings, remember that they are very expensive. Assume that each hour of a meeting will cost you about $100 per participant. And not just that, especially with technical personnel, your opportunity cost will be to lose that hour of their productivity. But especially when major decisions or approvals need to happen, you won't be able to do without a meeting. So, meetings. The first rule about meetings is have an agenda, preferably with assigned timestamps, and stick to them. Any problem solving or detailed conversations can happen outside of any meeting when fewer people need to participate, and the results can be reported at the next meeting or in a follow-up email. The second rule of project meetings is schedule them for 30 minutes. Remember, you are there to make decisions, not to find solutions. My third rule is make sure someone takes notes and circulates those after the meeting to ensure everybody knows what was discussed and decided and who was there to discuss and decide. And the fourth important rule of meetings is nobody gets to walk out of a meeting without an action item, meaning a task to do in support of what was just discussed. These action items and their owners and their due dates are all part of the meeting notes or meeting minutes that will be distributed. To be clear, these 4 rules apply to all the platforms in which you can conduct meetings. That's conference rooms, teleconferences, video conferences like Zoom calls, any kind of interaction in which people talk with one another. So then there's email. Reserve email for one-way communication unless you want to bog down people's inboxes with endless back and forth responses. Due to the screen layout, content will soon become hidden and it's impossible to find important information anymore. Email is literally a push tool, and portals like SharePoint are pull tools, unless you set up a wiki or a Reddit or a traditional discussion board whose very nature consists of team contribution or question and answer. I have been in organizations in which the weekly project status report consisted of entering a CPI, SPI, and the top 3 risks into a SharePoint portal, and I have been in organizations in which a project status report was a 5-page weekly Microsoft Word file that had to be sent to a distribution list of about 50 stakeholders, and then as a 1-page screen had to be texted to people's mobile phones as well. However you choose to get your information to your stakeholders, I can't emphasize enough that honest, transparent, timely, and most importantly, self-aware communication is key to project success. So here are my 6 rules for excellence in project communication. Number 1, never bury crucial information. Even if, and this is point number 2, the information is bad for your project outcome, deal with any risks or looming problems head on and right away. Number 2, don't be afraid to report bad information, as I said before. Just be sure that you have an idea or 2 on how to solve the problem before you communicate it. Nobody likes surprises, but you can soften the blow of a bad surprise with your own creativity and ingenuity. Number 3, meetings and informal talks help socialize important information. But this does not mean that you should have a meeting just about anything. Meetings are super expensive. Imagine getting 10 people into a room for an hour. If every person costs the project about $100 per hour, then you have just spent $1,000 on disseminating information. Make sure you have a very good reason to spend that money out of your project budget. Otherwise, perhaps a quick conversation in the office kitchen as you microwave your lunch might be all you need to figure out your issue, or maybe a well thought out quick message into your Slack channel. Number 3, getting project information to the right people at the right time in the right format is as important as developing the information in the first place. Find out what your stakeholders' preferred mode of communication is and then go with what the majority of the people with influence and power tell you. If they want an old school email, send that email. But keep it to a few short sentences so someone else can read it comfortably on their cell phone. If they want a post on the SharePoint board, do that. And be sure that you know who is allowed to get what information about your project. In many organizations, outside contractors are not allowed to have any insight into project budgets and finances. So if you even just inadvertently publish that information, you and your organization could get into a lot of trouble. We will in fact talk about this point again when we develop the communications management plan. Number 5, consider the use of technology-appropriate methods and media to use when performance reporting. This goes with what I just said, really. If you're reporting your project status up into the organization, a more conservative and formal tool like email or SharePoint might be much more appropriate than a quick post into your Slack channel. But if you need to quickly get feedback on whether your team can build a feature, a short post to your Slack channel will get you results faster and may in fact also trigger important discussions. Lastly, what you mean isn't always what people hear or read. This is the self-aware part, and it's huge. Remember the feedback cycle where you encode and your receiver decodes your idea? As a project manager, it's your responsibility not just to listen to your stakeholders and make sure you understand what they are telling you, but also to make sure that your messages are correctly understood and in the way you originally intended them. This is crucial because it really goes back to the culture you grew up in. As a European, I'm used to getting to my point in a short and direct manner. That does not work very well in an American enterprise, where small talk and kindness in communication are valued very highly and often precede the sharing of any information, whether it's good or bad. So, being aware of the ways in which the way you grew up has shaped your communication style, the vocabulary, and the tone of voice you use, the way you move your face, hands, and your entire body, all that can influence how someone understands what you communicate. At the same time, it's crucial to understand how the people with whom you're communicating use their vocabulary, tone of voice, body language, and so forth. As a project manager, it is your job to bridge any cultural gaps in communication to ensure that people hear or read your message the way you need them to. The need for continuous improvement is a reality in all organizations, from the operational level on a factory floor to the efficiency with which data is being analyzed and consumed. It is also the hallmark of a great project manager. Let's look at a few strategies you can use. One of the aspects that does not get much love in organizational training is people's so-called soft skills. And for a project manager, these are more important than the technical skills. You have your engineers and developers for the technical skills. They have you to keep their paychecks funded and their stress level low. How do you do this? By constantly working at becoming a better communicator so you can advocate for their needs to the organizational management around your project. The first step is to admit to yourself that, and I know this may come as a shock for some of you, your communication is not perfect. But then you must already be pretty good at what you do, because otherwise you wouldn't have been asked to manage your project. There are many ways to find out where your strengths lie and where your opportunities for improvement are hiding. Some scientific tests, often called personal inventories that were developed by specialists in organizational behavior, can help here. Here is a list of the best known ones at this time. In fact, some companies may administer one of these before they employ you to see in what position you would be the most productive. Secondly, we know what's right and what's wrong. Or do we? That basic understanding of the world is usually formed in our childhoods, which we spend with a limited circle of influential adults. Do the same things that we have learned about people's skin color, gender, class, sexual preference, or physical or mental abilities still hold true 20 years later when we have to work with dozens, if not hundreds, of people from all walks of life? Probably not. Many companies have anti-discrimination policies in place, and the last thing you want is to have to talk to someone in HR because you made an offhand comment or joke that could disparage a stakeholder on your project. That's not only embarrassing, it will also set your career back significantly. So from time to time, it's a good idea to examine what your prejudices against other people may be, not only to help your own career, but to create an effective and efficient and welcoming project team. Lastly, and I cannot emphasize this enough, learning the target culture of the people with whom you're interacting most is so very important. If you are working in an American company and your native culture is from anywhere else in the world, figuring out how Americans like to interact to get business done and learning this social code is crucial to your success. In many cases, reading magazines or blogs written by people who have been through the same process can help. Even better, if you can get a local mentor, or in the case of an offshore development team, can deputize a local manager there, you will be much more successful. Here, for example, is such a test. Please pause this video and see if you can find that URL. If you can, take the test and see the result. If you cannot, take a look at the questions and give them some good thought. When you're done, please come back. Planning your message, whether spoken or written, is key. Before you start communicating, take a moment to figure out what you want to say and why. Don't waste time conveying information that isn't necessary, and don't waste the listener or reader's time either. Too often, people just keep talking or writing because they think that by saying more, they'll surely cover all the points. Often, however, all they do is confuse the people that they're talking to. Here are the major aspects to consider. When you do this, you'll be able to craft a message that will be received positively by your audience. Good communicators use the KISS, keep it simple and straightforward principle. They know that less is often more, and that good communication should be efficient as well as effective. The next step is encoding, creating a clear, well-crafted message. When you know what you want to say, decide exactly how you'll say it. You're responsible for sending a message that's clear and concise. To achieve this, you need to consider not only what you'll say, but also how you think the recipient will perceive it. We often focus on the message that we want to send and the way in which we'll send it. But if our message is delivered without considering the recipient's perspective, it's likely that part of that message will be lost. To communicate more effectively, understand what you truly need and want to say, and anticipate the other person's reaction to your message. Choose words and body language that allow the other person to really hear what you're saying. And with written communication, make sure that what you write will be perceived the way you intend. Words on a page generally have no emotion. They don't smile or frown at you while you're reading them. So when writing, take time to review your style. Is it formal enough? Avoid jargon or slang, but use the correct acronyms that are specific to your company, including your company's writing policies or style guides. These can include tone, attitude, and a whole lot more. Lastly, be sure to check your grammar and punctuation. Take a look at the email here. Nothing screams not management material more than the empty subject line, the way of addressing team members, the obvious swear word, which might get this email flagged by company policy, then the letter U for the personal pronoun you, and the emoji. Ugh! Once you have worked on your message, choosing the right channel is important because you want people to be able to see the information and respond easily if they choose to. You want to be efficient while also making the most of your communication opportunity. Using email to send simple directions is practical. However, if you want to delegate a complex task, an email will probably just lead to more questions, so it may be best to arrange a time to speak in person. And if your communication has any negative emotional content, such as announcements that there will be personnel cuts or layoffs, stay well away from email. Make sure that you communicate face-to-face or by phone, so that you can judge the impact of your words and adjust your message appropriately. So when choosing the right channel for your message, consider the following: the sensitivity and emotional content of the subject. How easy is it to communicate detail? The receiver's preferences, time constraints, and the need to ask and answer questions. It can be easy to focus on speaking. We want to get our points out there because we usually have lots to say. However, to be a great communicator, you also need to step back and let the other person talk and listen. This doesn't mean that you should be passive. Listening is hard work, which is why effective listening is called active listening. To listen actively, give your undivided attention to the speaker. You can look at the person, pay attention to his or her body language, make sure you avoid distractions, and nod and smile to acknowledge the points that they're making. Also, occasionally think back about what the person has said and allow the person to speak without thinking about what you'll say next. And lastly, don't interrupt. Empathic listening also helps you decode messages accurately. To understand a message fully, you have to understand the emotions and underlying feelings that the speaker is expressing. This is where an understanding of body language can be useful. The graphic on the right side here gives you a few more ideas as to how you can make a person feel more comfortable sharing information with you and how to get at all the information you need, such as paraphrasing, summarizing, and asking open-ended questions. You need feedback, because without it, you can't be sure that people have understood your message. Sometimes feedback is verbal, and sometimes it's not. We've looked at the importance of asking questions and listening carefully. However, feedback through body language can also help you to assess the impact of your message. By watching the facial expressions, gestures, and posture of the person you're communicating with, you can spot confidence levels, defensiveness, agreement, comprehension or lack of understanding, level of interest, level of engagement with the message, and also truthfulness or lying and dishonesty. As a speaker, understanding your listener's body language can give you an opportunity to adjust your message and make it more understandable, appealing, or interesting. As a listener, body language can show you more about what the other person is saying. You can then ask questions to ensure that you have indeed understood each other. In both situations, you can better avoid miscommunication if it happens. Feedback can also be formal. If you're communicating something really important, it can be often worth asking questions of the person you're talking to make sure that they've understood fully. And if you're receiving this sort of communication, repeat it in your own words to check your understanding. Now that you have a pretty good idea of how to improve your communication, we need to talk more about the what, who, why, when, where, and how of this communication. That's what a communication plan is for. You organize all of the project's communication information in the project communication plan. The purpose of the communication plan is to define the communication requirements for the project and how information will be distributed. It is based on the stakeholder register. The communication management plan defines at a minimum what information will be communicated and the level of detail and format, how the information will be communicated, meetings, email, telephone, web portal, etc., when information will be distributed, that includes the frequency of project communications, both formal and informal. It defines who is responsible for communicating project information and the communication requirements for all project stakeholders. Lastly, the management plan defines how any sensitive or confidential information is communicated and who must authorize this. As you can see, communications management starts at the beginning of the project with a communication management plan and continues until the end. Why? Because throughout the project, you will be identifying old, new, or changing stakeholders who need to receive your communication. You will be retooling your communication, and you will talk to your team and your stakeholders and ensure that the correct project information, whether technical or administrative, gets to the right people. Of a project communications plan. As you can see, this table looks very similar to a stakeholder registry minus the confidential columns, of course. You will want to state which stakeholder or stakeholder group gets what document, in what format, and when. And it's very important to have at least one contact person who gets onto your email distribution list, because you certainly don't want your communication getting stuck in somebody's vacation email box. As you can already tell, this table is the basis for a living document, that is, a document that changes throughout the life of the project, as old stakeholders leave, new stakeholders come on, and more people request more project information. You can see here a template for a communications plan, which I have actually used professionally. Most of the columns should look familiar to you, and some of the stakeholders' information needs items like SPI, CPI, ETC, planned work, and so on should not come as a surprise. However, let's take a look at the last three columns: key message, who communicates, and sensitive or classified information. Okay, first, key message. If your project introduces a major change in the ways in which people in your organization or in your customer's organization work, you can become your own marketing and PR department, especially if you have no internal communications or change management staff to support you. This means you may have to get your creative people together and figure out a slogan or a jingle and use this slogan consistently across the entire communications period. For example, I was once running a project that changed the ways in which 4,000 employees ordered their company cell phones. We were transitioning from a decentralized approach in which everybody would just send the department secretary an email to a centralized ordering portal with management approval flows, billing reviews, and so on. As you can imagine, that is a big change, especially since employees would not be able to order the newest iPhone anymore, but one from a number of phones that had been pre-selected for their career level. And their management would have insight into their phone bills. This was a major change, especially in the expectation of corporate privacy, and the communication around this had to be carefully managed. Enter a carefully crafted key message, which became the subject line of every informational email that was sent to those 4,000 employees. When I say was sent out, that brings me to my next point. Because it wasn't I, the project manager, who ended up sending these messages. It was the director of internal change management. Why? Because she had been with the company for over 10 years and knew almost everybody personally, and everybody knew and really liked her. And as you have learned before in this course, the best person to communicate is not always you. On to the last column. Different information is for different levels of the organization, right? Imagine what would happen if confidential design information for a new product leaked outside your company just because you included the wrong person in an email list. Or if the agreed hourly rates for various contractors, which are important for the finance department to know, would accidentally also be sent to the contractors themselves, and they could see how much more or less someone from a different agency makes. That's why this yes-no switch or even more detailed information is important to document. One of the most frequent pieces of formal project communication that any project manager is handling is the project status report. Believe it or not, there are different types of reports that all might look like project status reports, but they aren't. Often, however, all of these kinds of reporting show up together in the same document. So we have the status reports that describe where the project stands at a specific point in time, progress reports that describe what the project team has accomplished during a certain period of time, and forecasts that predict future project status and progress based on past information and trends. Very often you may get a little template like the ones shown here to fill out, and it looks so easy, doesn't it? Until you have to provide the information. As you can see, project status reports are full of metrics, and these metrics have different formats. There are text fields, date fields, stoplight colors, dollar figures for budget, worked hours planned versus actual, then ETC, EAC, variance at completion, or whatever other earned value information stakeholders need to know. And then the key milestone dates, with a comparison of planned versus actual and any explanations if milestones were missed. And we haven't even talked about the risks yet. These are all the important measurements of your project, which you will be expected to communicate on a weekly basis and show progress for the money you're spending. This also means this innocent-looking little document can become a true political minefield, from disagreements on the status stoplight color, whether it should be green, red, or yellow, to the top 3 risks that you mention, or the explanations for any missed milestones. It is a good idea, if this document is due on Friday, to start working on it on Wednesday, just to ensure you have all the information rock solid in place before submitting it. At this point, please pause this video and take a quick look at the other materials on earned value management to remind yourself of how these super important metrics like CPI, SPI, earned value, EAC, and BAC are calculated. Then come back. Here is another status report format, one that I actually have used professionally. As you can see, metrics are everywhere. And if you have a project in which various sprints or work streams are running at the same time, you may be asked to report these metrics for every single sprint, which is called phase here. If you're on a waterfall project, very often you're done at this point, unless you're being asked to show budget or requirements burn-down charts. Now, with an agile project, you will most likely need to show the burn-down charts as well. Sometimes burn-down charts are part of the weekly status report. In an agile context, the burn-down charts are often shown at the end of each sprint. The point here is that a picture says more than 1,000 words. And when it comes to showing how the scope, features, or functionality or work is being completed over time, whether continuously, as in waterfall management, or in a set of time boxes, as in agile, graphs go a long way and often become part of a project status report. Naturally, there are other reports too that you may have to assemble as the project manager, whether that's progress reports with forecasts or complete review packages that can contain hundreds of pages. Many project management applications can help you complete your performance, progress, or status reporting with built-in report modules. Here you see the reporting interface for Microsoft Project and the basic project review report. This project overview report combines graphs and tables to show where each phase of the project stands, upcoming milestones and tasks that are past their due dates. That's only one of the canned reports. You can see that a burn-down chart is also available and a cost overview, and then a ton more reports. You can even configure your own. The reporting tools in PROJECTLIBRE are organized a little bit differently. You can find them under the View tab. Now, please pause this video if you have PROJECTLIBRE installed and go take a look and find the project reports. Then come back. And now let's take a look at communications in a case study. So here's a fun and realistic exercise in communications management. Imagine it is Friday afternoon around 3 p.m. That's when typically bad news drop in many organizations. You open your email app and see a message from your company's CEO. You open it and find the text in the blue box. This is obviously an exercise in decoding and then taking action, so your first stop will be to read the email and figure out exactly what it is trying to tell you. And I mean exactly. This may take you 3 or 4 times of reading through it. Then your job will be to deliver a forecast in the form of an updated status report because your project must go on, right? So you will have to determine what the math is that is hiding in this email. Do the math and come up with a plan as to how you can rescue your project. Pause this video now to do exactly that. Have some fun, and then come back when you're done. So we're at the end of our module on project communications management. Here is what you have learned. Since 70 to 80% of a project manager's job is to communicate with all the stakeholders on the project, PMI, the Project Management Institute, has allocated 2 knowledge areas to successful interpersonal relationships: project communication management and project stakeholder management. This shows how successful communication is the centerpiece of a successful project. We have looked at the basic parts of the communication process and learned how to plan regular, transparent, honest, and accessible communication with project stakeholders. This included reviewing some time-proven practices at improving our own communication skills and identifying tools that can help get messages back and forth quickly and with ease. Lastly, we have looked at the project status report and the information it conveys to the stakeholders in various applications, and you have practiced how to decode, encode, and react to some interesting company news. This brings us to our vocabulary for project communications management. Please take a look at the word list and make sure you can define and explain each of these words. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in one of the next modules.